Victor, a 29-year-old man, transformed from being his family's personal ATM to someone who completely dismantled their toxic control and walked away without looking back. His family consisted of Matthew, his dad, a 58-year-old man who acted like a dictator, and Matthew's spoiled son, Jack. These two had turned their house into their personal kingdom, with Victor serving as the peasant who funded their entire lifestyle. Matthew had worked in construction until Victor's mother, Marina, relocated to Germany for a nursing position when Victor was 16. When the euro checks began arriving, Matthew quickly abandoned his tool belt. His logic was simple. Why break his back when Marina had them covered from overseas? Matthew's decision to become professionally unemployed remained burned into Victor's memory. At 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, Victor arrived home from school to witness Matthew ceremoniously discarding his work boots in the trash while opening a celebratory drink. "Your old man is retired, Victor," Matthew declared as if he had won the lottery rather than decided to become a parasite. "It's time for you to step up and provide for this family." Victor was only 16 years old, but Matthew had already determined that Victor's future would be spent funding his grandiose fantasies. However, Matthew wasn't content with being lazy. He needed to maintain absolute control. Every household decision went through him. What they ate, which channels they watched, who could drive the car, and when the heat was turned on. It was small-minded energy compensating by micromanaging everything he touched. Then there was Jack, Victor's younger brother, and Matthew's mini-me. Jack was 25 but acted like he was 15, complete with the belief that the world owed him everything. While Victor worked factory shifts, Jack was honing his Xbox skills and demonstrating his ability to be completely useless to anyone who suggested he get a job. Jack worked around 15 hours a week at a GameStop knockoff, blowing his entire paycheck on energy drinks, marijuana, and whatever new sneakers would help him pretend he wasn't a loser. He spent the rest of his time sitting in his room playing Call of Duty and talking to 12-year-olds online. He would stay awake until 4 a.m. screaming at his gaming headset, then sleep until 2 p.m. and complain about being tired from his rigorous schedule of doing nothing productive. Matthew rationalized this as Jack discovering his passion, as if being a professional disappointment was a legitimate career path. Their house was a dilapidated ranch-style structure with a sinking foundation and pipes that sounded like dying animals every time someone flushed. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and the persistent odor of Matthew's cigarettes combined with Jack's energy drink farts. Matthew ruled his realm from his throne, a worn-out recliner with permanent indentations. From there, he would bark orders, criticize everything Victor did, and constantly remind him that he owed Matthew for providing a roof over his head. The worst part was that Victor believed him. When their mother left, she pulled Victor aside and said, "Take care of your father and brother, Victor. You're the man of the house now. Don't let them down." Matthew ensured that Victor understood the hierarchy. Matthew was the king, Jack was the prince, and Victor was the court jester whose job was to pay for everyone's entertainment. When Victor suggested that Jack get a real job or that Matthew contribute something, Matthew reminded him who was the head of the household. His favorite line was, "You live under my roof. You follow my rules." Never mind that Victor was paying for the roof, the rules, and everything else that kept their miserable lives going. Matthew had a talent for making Victor feel ridiculous for demanding even basic respect. He would twist every conversation so that Victor became the problem. He knew exactly which buttons to press to make Victor feel guilty about wanting anything for himself. Jack, having learned from his master, was developing his own skill at making any request sound unreasonable. Victor spent his early 20s believing that sacrificing everything for these two was normal. That family meant becoming everyone else's solution to the problems they created. His desire to keep some of what he earned made him greedy. Or so they convinced him. However, they were about to learn their lesson the hard way. At 19, Victor got a job at a metal fabrication plant about 30 minutes outside of town. 8 hours of cutting steel, welding brackets, and gradually destroying his hearing at a facility that appeared not to have been updated since the Carter era. However, the pay was steady, and someone needed to keep Matthew's kingdom from collapsing. The plant was run by Frank, an old-school supervisor who had been there since it opened. He pulled Victor aside during his first week and said, "Kid, I can tell the difference between guys who work and guys who just show up. Which one are you going to be?" Victor told him he needed the job too much to mess around. Frank nodded and said, "Good, because the guys who just show up don't last here, and I can spot them from across the floor." Frank became Victor's unofficial mentor, teaching him that respect in the workplace was earned through performance, not begging or playing politics. Every 2 weeks, Matthew would wait for Victor with his hand extended, not asking but demanding. He had cornered Victor after his first paycheck and explained how things worked in his house. "Your money goes into the family pot," Matthew said as if explaining basic math to a child. "I decide how it gets spent. Rent, utilities, groceries, everything. You want to spend money, you ask me for it." Victor had to ask Matthew for his own money that he had earned. Matthew had a ritual around payday that still made Victor's blood boil thinking about it. Matthew would position himself at the kitchen table with a calculator, legal pad, and a smug expression like he was some kind of financial genius. "Let's see what the family earned this week," he would say as if he had contributed a single cent. Then Matthew would itemize every expense, real and imaginary, while Victor stood there like a child getting lectured about allowance, rent, utilities, groceries, miscellaneous household expenses, which somehow always included Matthew's beer money and Jack's latest gaming purchase. However, Matthew wasn't just taking Victor's money. Meanwhile, Jack was given an allowance as if he were 12 years old. Matthew controlled the bank account where Victor's checks were deposited, decided which groceries they bought, and determined whether Victor could afford to replace his work boots, which had holes in them. Every weekend, Matthew would give Jack $50 for being a good kid, while Victor had to justify buying soap. Jack's contribution to the household was limited to taking out the trash if Matthew specifically told him to do so. Cooking, cleaning, and yard work were all Victor's responsibilities. Jack was 25 years old. By then, most people had figured out how to wash dishes, but the disparity in how Matthew treated them became a daily humiliation. Jack could sleep until noon, leave dirty dishes everywhere, and treat the house like his personal fraternity house, whereas Victor was held to military standards, and had a curfew at age 22. While Jack could stumble home at 3 a.m. reeking of cheap weed without consequences, Matthew would explain when Victor pointed out the hypocrisy. "You're the responsible one. Act like it." Translation: Jack gets to be a perpetual teenager while Victor gets to be everyone's parent. 3 years into his manufacturing job, management noticed something unusual about Victor. He genuinely cared about doing good work. While his co-workers were perfecting the art of looking busy, Victor was fixing problems, streamlining processes, and generally acting like someone who understood that work quality mattered. They promoted him to floor supervisor, which came with a modest pay increase. More importantly, it got him noticed by the front office executives who made real decisions. It turned out that Victor had a natural talent for logistics and organization. Frank was the first to recognize Victor's potential. One day he brought Victor into his office and said, "Victor, you see things other people miss. Yesterday, you caught that shipping error that would have cost us $50,000. Most guys would have just signed the paperwork and made it someone else's problem." Frank introduced Victor to the operations manager, who began giving him special projects that showcased his analytical skills. Within 2 years, they promoted him to operations management, then supply chain coordination, and finally regional logistics. Each position bringing higher salary and more respect from people who weren't related to him. In 6 years, Victor went from cutting metal for peanuts to managing multi-million-dollar contracts. His salary increased tenfold, but Matthew and Jack had no idea. Victor would leave the house in the same beat-up work clothes, drive to a gas station 3 miles away, and change into business attire in the bathroom. As far as his family knew, his factory had started requiring office meetings. Matthew's narcissistic mind couldn't handle the thought of his worker son becoming more successful than Matthew had ever been. So, Victor continued to hand over the same amount every payday, equivalent to his original factory wages. That explained why he was wearing khakis instead of steel-toed boots. Matthew would still sit on his throne demanding his tribute with the same entitled attitude. "Come on, Victor. Don't make me wait for the household money." Victor would hand it over with a straight face while mentally calculating how much was accumulating in his secret war chest. By the 5th year, Victor had enough saved to buy a house outright. By year 6, he could have lived comfortably for 3 years without working at all. The hardest part wasn't hiding the money. It was watching these two waste what he gave them. Matthew's drinking budget alone could have paid for a decent vacation, and Jack's monthly allowance was enough to cover some people's grocery bills. Victor's real job became increasingly demanding and rewarding. While at home, he was still being lectured about fiscal responsibility by a man whose greatest financial achievement was successfully cashing unemployment checks. The cognitive dissonance was mind-bending. Victor would close a deal that saved the company $300,000 per year, only to come home to Matthew explaining why he couldn't afford better work boots. Victor's carefully constructed double life went nuclear. He had just closed a massive contract that would save his company about $800,000 per year, and his bonus from that deal alone was more than Matthew had made in the last 5 years combined. Victor printed the direct deposit confirmation to file with his other records, but he made a fatal mistake. He left it on the kitchen counter. Jack found it the next morning while scavenging for breakfast money. "Holy Victor," Jack screamed loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. "Look at this freaking number." Matthew came running like Jack had discovered oil in the backyard. When Matthew saw that deposit slip, his face went through about 6 different emotions in 10 seconds. The silence that followed Jack's discovery was deafening. Matthew just stood there holding that piece of paper like it was ancient scripture, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jack was practically vibrating with excitement, probably already mentally spending money he didn't own. "Dude, this changes everything," Jack said, his voice shaking with greed. "We're freaking rich. This is what they're paying you?" Matthew asked, clutching the paper like it was evidence of Victor's crimes against the family. "And you've been giving us the same amount for years." Victor tried to stay calm. "That money is mine. I earned it. You two contribute nothing to this house except drama and bills." Matthew's face turned that special shade of red he got when someone dared to question his authority. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. This is my house and I decide how money gets spent here." Jack jumped in with his usual brilliance. "We know how much you make now, Victor. You've been holding out on us. I want a car, a nice one, and my own place. You can afford it now." The entitlement was breathtaking. But Matthew had bigger plans. He sat back down on his throne and laid out his new world order with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. "Here's how this is going to work, Victor. You're going to give me access to all your accounts from now on, and I'll manage the money properly. Make sure Jack has everything he needs for his future, and make sure I can enjoy my retirement properly. You'll get an allowance like Jack. Maybe $500 a week if you're good." $500 a week out of Victor's 6-figure salary. "Another thing," Matthew added, warming up to his dictatorship fantasy. "You'll get a local job where I can keep an eye on you. No more getting ideas above your station. I've been too lenient with you, and clearly you can't be trusted to make good decisions on your own." The irony was staggering. The man who hadn't made a good decision since the Clinton administration was going to manage Victor's career. That's when Victor started laughing. "Absolutely not," he said. "I'm done with this. I'm moving out." Matthew's face turned from red to purple. When Victor went to his room to start packing, Matthew grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Before Victor could react, Matthew's fist connected with his jaw so hard it snapped his head sideways. Victor staggered backward, tasting blood, while Matthew loomed over him like a trailer park tyrant. "You live in my house. You follow my rules," Matthew snarled, flexing his hand. "Now get your ass in that kitchen, and we'll discuss your new budget like civilized people." Jack was standing in the doorway with a horrible grin on his face. "Maybe next time you'll listen when Dad's talking," Jack added, clearly enjoying the spectacle. When Victor touched his jaw and felt the swelling start, something inside him snapped. He looked at these two people who thought violence was an acceptable way to handle his desire for basic human dignity. "Okay," Victor said, slowly getting to his feet. "You want to do this the hard way? Let's do it the hard way." That evening, Victor drove straight to the police station with a swollen lip and a jaw that felt like it had been hit with a crowbar. He filed a formal assault complaint against Matthew, complete with photos of his injuries and a detailed statement about the financial abuse and control. The cops were surprisingly helpful, and they sent 2 officers to arrest Matthew. That same day, Jack called Victor while Matthew was being processed, screaming about how Victor was destroying the family and demanding that he drop the charges. Victor hung up on him and blocked his number. Matthew spent the night in county jail before making bail. When he got out, he called Victor from his lawyer's office. "Drop the charges, Victor," he said, trying to sound reasonable instead of desperate. "This is family business. We don't air family business in court." "Nope," Victor replied. "You wanted to play dictator. Now you get to play defendant." That's when Matthew's mask fully slipped and the calm, rational voice disappeared, replaced by pure rage. "You think you can destroy me? I made you." Victor hung up and called his lawyer. It was time to see how Matthew liked playing games with someone who could afford better legal representation than the public defender he had managed to scrape together. Victor's lawyer, Allison Chin, was a pit bull in a tailored suit who specialized in family law and domestic abuse cases. When Victor showed her his documentation of 12 years of financial control and abuse, her eyes lit up. "Your father has been living above his means for 12 years with no reportable income," she explained, pulling out spreadsheets that made Matthew's napkin budgeting look like crayon drawings. "The IRS takes a dim view of people who live like kings while claiming to be paupers. We're not just going to destroy him legally. We're going to financially eviscerate him." Matthew's trial was everything Victor had hoped for and more. Allison built a comprehensive case that exposed Matthew for what he was, a financial predator who had spent over a decade stealing from his own son. The prosecution laid it out in detail: 12 years of taking Victor's entire paycheck while contributing nothing, 12 years of financial control and manipulation, and 12 years of tax evasion on money he had essentially stolen. The best moment came when they played the recorded phone call from jail where Matthew threatened Victor for pressing charges. His voice was clear as day, promising to make Victor regret seeking justice. "I made you, and I can unmake you just as easily." The jury's faces said it all, 12 people looking at Matthew like he was something they would scrape off their shoes. Matthew took the stand in his own defense, which was an epic mistake. Under cross-examination, he tried to justify 12 years of financial abuse as teaching responsibility and claimed that hitting Victor was simply a father disciplining his son. The prosecutor was ruthless. "Mr. Matthew, your son was 28 when you hit him. In what world is that appropriate discipline? He was showing disrespect, living in my house, following my rules. He paid the mortgage on your house. Your rules were funded by his salary." Matthew's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Matthew had essentially admitted to financial abuse in open court. The jury reached their verdict in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all charges. Matthew was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, 5 years probation, and a court order to pay Victor $180,000 in restitution, calculated as the amount he had taken over the years beyond a reasonable household contribution. The real cherry on top was the tax evasion conviction. The IRS had been particularly interested in Matthew's unreported income over the previous 12 years. They hit him with back taxes, penalties, and interest beyond his ability to pay. Mr. Matthew owes approximately $347,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest, the IRS agent explained, looking through his file like it was a grocery list. Given his current financial situation and earning potential, will be garnishing any income he receives for the rest of his natural life. Jack's response to his father's conviction was to escalate the harassment. The restraining order didn't seem to matter much to him. He started using burner phones to send threatening texts and had his gaming buddies leave anonymous voicemails. Victor and his cousin Paul documented everything: photos, recordings, and witness statements. Jack was building a solid case for felony harassment and stalking. The second restraining order hearing was even more satisfying than the first. Jack showed up without a lawyer, representing himself with the legal knowledge of a ham sandwich. Jack addressed the judge directly. "My brother destroyed our family. My dad is in prison because of him. I have the right to be angry." The judge looked at him like he had confessed to war crimes. "You have the right to be angry, Mr. Jack. You do not have the right to stalk and threaten people." Jack was charged with criminal stalking, sentenced to 6 months in county jail, and given an extended restraining order that would last 5 years. 2 years later, Victor was writing from the deck of his new home. Not an apartment, but a house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an attached garage, and a backyard with only his own beer bottles. The consequences of Matthew and Jack's legal destruction were even more satisfying than Victor had anticipated. Matthew served his full 18 months and came out to find that his kingdom had been repossessed. It turned out that banks get annoyed when you can't make mortgage payments from prison. Matthew's release from prison was a study in poetic justice. Victor heard through the grapevine that Matthew came out expecting to reclaim his kingdom, only to find the house in foreclosure and Jack living in a studio apartment that smelled of failure and ramen noodles. Matthew's empire collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane once he lost his living ATM. Last Victor heard, Matthew was renting a room from one of his drinking buddies and working part-time at a hardware store, giving most of his paycheck to the IRS. Jack bounced around couch surfing in homeless shelters before landing a job at a car wash. His gaming setup was sold to pay court costs, and his dream of living off his brother's success died faster than his kill-death ratio. The restitution payments kept coming, about $800 a month between the two of them. It was like getting a bonus check from the universe for standing up to bullies. Victor's cousin Paul became more than backup. He became Victor's chosen family. When blood relatives showed their true colors, Paul was there to support him. They still texted daily, and Paul visited every few months to make sure Victor didn't become a hermit. "You know what I love most about this situation?" Paul had said during his last visit while they were drinking beer on Victor's deck and grilling steaks. Matthew thought he was the king of his castle, but he was just a parasite. Parasites die when they lose their host. Paul had a point. Matthew's entire identity was built around controlling Victor. When that control disappeared, he had nothing. Jack's identity was even more pathetic. The golden child who never had to grow up because daddy always handled everything. Prison and real life hit him like a freight train. But their destruction wasn't the best revenge. It was Victor's success. Victor was now a regional director for his company, overseeing operations in 8 states. The salary was ridiculous. The benefits were absurd. And instead of running from toxic people, he was dating Allison, the lawyer who had helped destroy Matthew's case. Beyond their shared appreciation for legal revenge, they discovered they had a lot in common. She had her own career, her own house, and a therapist-approved way of dealing with toxic family members. She understood boundaries, respected autonomy, and never asked for access to Victor's finances or tried to control his decisions. During one of their early dates, she had told him that healthy relationships were about addition, not subtraction. Good partners enhance your life while preserving your independence. The restraining orders remained in effect for 3 more years. No contact, no communication, no showing up in Victor's life. It was like having a legal force field around everything he had built. Victor occasionally ran into people from the old neighborhood who knew Matthew and Jack. They often started with something like, "I heard what happened with your family," followed by either pity or judgment. The judgment didn't bother Victor anymore. Anyone who thought he should have continued enabling two grown men who refused to take care of themselves could join Matthew and Jack in the category of people whose opinions were irrelevant. Matthew and Jack had chosen to be parasites instead of people. When their host finally said no, they chose violence over self-improvement. When violence failed, they chose harassment over accepting consequences. Every choice they made was wrong. Victor chose to build a life where toxic people couldn't reach him, where his success was his to enjoy rather than being redistributed to people who never deserved it. Matthew was probably eating prison food and planning his next appeal. Jack was probably washing cars and dreaming about his glory days of Xbox achievements. And Victor was living proof that the best family is often the one you choose, not the one you're born into. Hi bestie, thank you for watching my video. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Bye.